The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. Mary Kim fumbled for the receiver, her heart already racing. After 29 years of false hopes and dead ends, she'd learned to expect the worst. "Mrs. Kim, this is Detective Sawyer with Cleburne County Cold Case Unit." Her fingers tightened around the phone. 3 decades of waiting, of wondering, of imagining every possible scenario about what happened to her daughter Elizabeth on that warm Alabama evening in 1990. "We got him." 200 miles away, in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Montgomery, police vehicles silently lined the street. Porch lights flickered on as curious neighbors peered through curtains. Inside one unassuming brick ranch house, a 61-year-old man was being placed in handcuffs, bewilderment etched across his face. He'd spent 29 years believing he'd gotten away with it. Cleburne County, Alabama sits nestled against the Georgia border, a patchwork of dense pine forests, rolling farmland and tight-knit communities where secrets rarely stay buried forever. In 1990, this rural landscape became the backdrop for a mystery that would haunt its residents for generations: the disappearance of 23-year-old Elizabeth Kim during a simple 6-block walk to visit a friend. For nearly 3 decades, her case gathered dust while life in Cleburne County carried on. Children were born, grew up, and had families of their own. The county courthouse received a renovation. The old diner where Elizabeth once worked closed down, reopened as something else, then closed again. Technology evolved. The world changed. But some things remained constant. Her mother, Mary, never moved, keeping the same phone number, just in case. The community never stopped whispering about what might have happened. And somewhere, hidden in plain sight, her killer walked free. Until now. Before I take you through this shocking case and the breakthrough that finally brought justice, take a second to hit that subscribe button. I dig deep into forgotten cases like Elizabeth every week, and I don't want you to miss a single story of long-awaited justice being served. Elizabeth Kim wasn't just another statistic or a faded photograph on a missing persons flyer. To those who knew her, she was a force of nature, a young woman with an infectious laugh that could fill a room and ambitions bigger than the small Alabama town she called home. Born in 1967 to Mary and Robert Kim, Elizabeth was the middle child of 3 siblings. Her older brother Michael described her as the glue of our family, stubborn as hell, but with a heart twice the size of Alabama. Growing up in Cleburne County meant everyone knew your business, but Elizabeth never seemed to mind. She embraced small-town life while dreaming of something more. By 1990, at 23 years old, Elizabeth had established herself as someone who was going places. A graduate of Cleburne County High School, she'd been working full-time at the local bank while taking night classes at the community college in Anniston. Her goal was clear: save enough money to transfer to Auburn University and study business. Her bedroom wall featured a hand-drawn calendar counting down the months until she could apply. She was determined to be the first in our family to get a college degree, Mary Kim would later tell investigators. Every penny she earned went into that college fund jar she kept on her dresser. Life in Cleburne County in 1990 moved at its own pace. The population hovered around 12,000, spread across small communities and rural farmland. Heflin, the county seat, was where most residents did their shopping, banking, and socializing. The local Piggly Wiggly grocery store served as an unofficial community center, where neighbors caught up on weekly gossip. The Heflin Grill stayed open late on Fridays, serving as a gathering spot for the younger crowd. Elizabeth's daily routine was predictable. She'd rise early, often before sunrise, to go jogging along the quiet streets of her neighborhood. Colleagues at First Alabama Bank described her as punctual and meticulous, arriving each morning with her signature travel mug of coffee. Evenings were split between study sessions at the library and spending time with her close circle of friends. "That girl had her whole life mapped out," recalled Sarah Jenkins, Elizabeth's childhood friend and co-worker. She kept this little notebook where she wrote down all her goals. Buy a car, check. Save $5,000 for school. She was halfway there. Find someone worth bringing home to mama. That one was still unchecked. Though Elizabeth had dated casually, Friends said she wasn't seriously involved with anyone in the months before her disappearance. Her focus remained on her future, on breaking out of the cycle that kept so many of her high school classmates tethered to Cleburne County forever. The weekend before she vanished, Elizabeth had driven with friends to Atlanta for a concert. Photos from that trip show her beaming in a denim jacket, arms thrown around her friends' shoulders, the city lights glowing behind them. It would be the last photograph ever taken of Elizabeth Kim. No one could have predicted that just 3 days later, on a mild Tuesday evening in May 1990, Elizabeth would step out her front door for a short walk to her friend Lisa's house 6 blocks away, a walk she'd made hundreds of times before, and vanish without a trace. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below. It's amazing to think about how this story from a small Alabama county is now reaching people across the country, and maybe even around the world. Tuesday, May 8, 1990, began like any other day for Elizabeth Kim. Her alarm clock buzzed at 5:45 a.m., and according to her mother, she was out the door by 6:15 for her morning jog, 3 miles through the quiet streets of Heflin. The spring air carried a slight chill that morning, enough that Elizabeth had pulled on a light windbreaker over her t-shirt and shorts. By 7:30 she was back home, showering and preparing for work. Mary Kim recalled their brief breakfast conversation that morning. Elizabeth mentioned an upcoming performance review at the bank and how she hoped for a small raise that would accelerate her college savings. She was counting pennies that morning, Mary would later tell detectives, figuring out if she could afford to take summer classes instead of waiting for fall. Security footage from First Alabama Bank showed Elizabeth arriving at 8:27 a.m., her hair still damp from her shower, carrying her lunch in a brown paper bag. Co-workers described the day as routine. Elizabeth processed loan applications, helped customers at her teller window, and ate lunch at her desk while studying her accounting textbook. Phone records would later confirm that at 2:13 p.m. Elizabeth received a call at her workstation. The call lasted less than a minute. According to her supervisor, after hanging up, Elizabeth asked if she could leave 30 minutes early that day. The request was approved. At 4:30 p.m., security cameras captured Elizabeth exiting the bank. She stopped briefly to chat with a coworker in the parking lot before getting into her blue 1985 Honda Civic. This casual conversation would later be scrutinized by investigators. The coworker reported nothing unusual about Elizabeth's demeanor or plans for the evening. Elizabeth arrived home at approximately 4:45 p.m. Her mother was working an evening shift at the hospital, and her father was on a business trip to Birmingham. Alone in the house, Elizabeth changed clothes, leaving her work attire neatly hung in her closet. The dinner dishes in the sink suggested she'd made herself a quick meal. A half-eaten sandwich remained on a plate. At 7:13 p.m., phone records show Elizabeth received another call. This one lasted nearly 10 minutes. The caller was her friend Lisa Winters, who lived 6 blocks away on Maple Street. According to Lisa's statement, they discussed meeting up to review notes for an upcoming exam. Lisa invited Elizabeth to come over, saying she'd just baked cookies and had fresh coffee. At 7:26 p.m., Elizabeth called her mother at work, leaving a brief message with the nurse's station. "Tell Mom I'm heading to Lisa's to study. Should be home by 10. This would be the last confirmed communication from Elizabeth Kim. Based on witness statements and the timeline reconstructed by investigators, Elizabeth left her house on Pine Avenue at approximately 7:30 p.m. She was wearing jeans, a navy blue Auburn University sweatshirt, and white sneakers. She carried a backpack containing her textbooks and notes. The walk to Lisa's house should have taken no more than 12 minutes. The route was one Elizabeth had walked countless times before, down Pine Avenue to Jackson Street, across the small neighborhood park, then 3 blocks along Maple Street to Lisa's house. Streetlights illuminated most of the path, though the section through the park had spotty lighting, with one lamp reported non-functional that evening. Mrs. Eleanor Simmons, an elderly neighbor who lived across from the park, told police she saw a young woman matching Elizabeth's description entering the park at approximately 7:40 p.m. This sighting aligned with the expected timeline and route. She was walking at a normal pace, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, Mrs. Simmons stated. "I noticed her because she waved at me while I was watering my front garden. I've known that Kim girl since she was knee-high." This would be the last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Kim. At 8:15 p.m., Lisa Winters began to worry. Elizabeth was typically punctual, and the walk should have taken no more than 15 minutes. She called the Kim residence but received no answer. Assuming Elizabeth had been delayed or changed her mind, Lisa continued studying alone. By 10:30 p.m., Mary Kim returned home from her hospital shift to find the house empty. Noticing the message she'd received about Elizabeth going to Lisa's, she wasn't immediately concerned. Assuming the study session had run late, she called Lisa's house. The conversation that followed would set in motion the frantic search for Elizabeth Kim. "She never showed up," Lisa told Mary, panic rising in her voice. "I thought maybe she changed her mind." Within minutes, Mary was on the phone with the Cleburne County Sheriff's Department. Deputy James Tanner arrived at the Kim residence by 11:15 p.m. Initially, he attempted to reassure Mary that Elizabeth had likely met up with other friends or had some minor emergency. Adults going missing for a few hours rarely triggered immediate concern in small-town Alabama. But something about this case felt different from the start. Elizabeth's car was still parked in the driveway. Her wallet sat on her dresser. Only her backpack was missing. This wasn't a young woman who had decided to take off spontaneously. By midnight, Deputy Tanner had called in additional officers. They began by retracing the route Elizabeth should have taken to Lisa's house. Flashlights swept across the neighborhood park, illuminating the children's playground, the picnic tables, the jogging path, but revealing nothing unusual. As dawn broke on Wednesday, May 9th, the search intensified. Robert Kim returned from his business trip, ashen-faced and desperate. Neighbors organized into search parties, combing through yards, checking sheds and garages. Local radio stations broadcast descriptions of Elizabeth and what she had been wearing. By Wednesday afternoon, the FBI had been notified. Special Agent Marcus Reynolds arrived from the Birmingham field office to assist local law enforcement. The 6-block radius around Elizabeth walking route was declared a crime scene. The first 48 hours of a missing persons case are critical, and as each hour passed without a sign of Donna, hope diminished. Flyers with her photograph appeared on every telephone pole and storefront in Cleburne County. Local businesses donated food and coffee to the volunteer searchers who continued through the night. On Thursday morning, May 10th, the discovery of Elizabeth's backpack sent shockwaves through the search effort. It was found partially hidden beneath a bush at the edge of the park, approximately halfway between her home and Lisa's house. The textbooks and notes were still inside, seemingly untouched. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood evidence, nothing to indicate what had happened. Only the abandoned backpack as silent testimony that something had gone terribly wrong on that 6-block walk. The discovery of Elizabeth's backpack transformed what had been a missing persons case into a suspected abduction. Sheriff Walter Daniels, a 22-year veteran of the Cleburne County Sheriff's Department, took personal command of the investigation. At a hastily arranged press conference on the courthouse steps, he made a solemn promise to the community. "We will not rest until we find Elizabeth and bring whoever is responsible to justice." The initial investigation team consisted of 4 county detectives, 2 state police officers, and FBI Special Agent Reynolds. They established a command center in the community room of the First Baptist Church, walls soon covered with maps, timelines, and photographs. A dedicated phone line was installed for tips, manned 24 hours a day by volunteers. Detective Roy Simmons, the lead investigator, employed what was then considered cutting-edge police work. The backpack was sent to the state crime lab in Montgomery for analysis. Each item inside was carefully examined for fingerprints, fibers, or any trace evidence that might identify who had handled it last. The results were disappointing. Only Elizabeth's prints were found, suggesting the perpetrator had been careful or wearing gloves. "We're dealing with someone who didn't leave much behind," Simmons told the sheriff in a briefing that was later obtained through case files. "This doesn't feel like a crime of opportunity. There's a methodical nature to it." The investigation quickly focused on establishing a list of potential suspects. In 1990, before sophisticated databases and DNA analysis became standard, detective work relied heavily on interviews, alibis, and instinct. The first category of suspects included men with criminal histories living within a 5-mile radius of the abduction site. Cleburne County had 7 registered sex offenders at the time, each of whom was interviewed extensively. 6 provided verifiable alibis for the evening of May 8th. The 7th, Raymond Walters, became an early person of interest when his alibi, claiming to be home alone watching television, couldn't be corroborated. Walters, a 42-year-old factory worker with a 1983 conviction for assault, lived just 3 blocks from the park, where Elizabeth's backpack was found. A search warrant executed on his residence yielded nothing connecting him to Donna, but detectives remained suspicious. For weeks, Walters was kept under surveillance, his movements tracked, his associates questioned. The second category included men in Elizabeth's life, current and former boyfriends, male co-workers, and acquaintances. Her most recent ex-boyfriend, Thomas Garrett, received particular scrutiny. They had dated for 8 months before breaking up 3 months prior to her disappearance. According to friends, the split had been Elizabeth's decision, and Thomas hadn't taken it well. He kept calling her, showing up at the bank, Lisa Winters told detectives. Elizabeth wasn't scared of him exactly, but she was getting frustrated. Thomas initially provided a weak alibi, claiming to be at home alone on the night of May 8th. However, his story changed when confronted with phone records showing he'd made calls from his parents' house 30 miles away in Oxford. This inconsistency kept him on the suspect list, though physical evidence linking him to the crime remained elusive. As May turned to June, the investigation expanded to include transient workers who had been in Cleburne County during that period. A construction crew had been repaving sections of Highway 78, and a traveling carnival had set up in the Piggly Wiggly parking lot the weekend before Elizabeth's disappearance. Each worker was tracked down and interviewed, creating hundreds of pages of reports but few solid leads. Meanwhile, the community's search efforts continued with remarkable dedication. Volunteers combed every inch of woodland within a 10-mile radius. Divers checked local ponds and creeks. Hunters and farmers on horseback covered the more remote areas of the county. Elizabeth's photograph appeared on regional newscasts and in newspapers across Alabama and Georgia. The Kim family offered a $10,000 reward for information, a substantial sum for a working-class family that represented their entire savings. Local businesses and churches raised additional funds, eventually increasing the reward to $25,000. By late summer, the investigation had generated over 400 tips, 212 formal interviews, and 17 search warrants. Physical evidence remained scarce. Beyond the backpack, investigators had recovered a single unidentified partial footprint from the soft ground near where the backpack was found, and several cigarette butts from the park area that couldn't be definitively linked to the case. In September 1990, 4 months after Elizabeth's disappearance, the FBI scaled back its involvement, though Agent Reynolds continued to consult on the case. The command center at the church was dismantled, the dedicated tip line disconnected. The investigation hadn't officially gone cold, but the daily momentum had stalled. Sheriff Daniels refused to let the case fade away completely. He assigned Detective Simmons to work on it exclusively, even as other crimes demanded the department's attention. Simmons kept a photograph of Elizabeth on his desk, a reminder of his promise to her family. "This one haunts me," Simmons confided to a reporter from the Anniston Star in a December 1990 article about unsolved cases. "Somebody in this county knows something. Somebody saw something that evening. We just haven't found them yet." By the 1-year anniversary of Elizabeth's disappearance, the active investigation had been reduced to following up on occasional tips and re-interviewing key witnesses in hopes that time might have loosened reluctant tongues. The annual police budget now included a line item specifically for the Kim investigation, a tacit acknowledgement that this had become a long-term case. On May 8, 1991, exactly 1 year after Elizabeth vanished, over 200 community members gathered in the park where her backpack had been found. They held candles and said prayers, releasing white balloons into the evening sky. Mary Kim addressed the crowd, her voice steady despite her grief. "My daughter is still missing, but the truth is not. The truth is out there, and someday it will come to light." No one in that somber gathering could have imagined that someday would take nearly 3 decades to arrive. Time moves differently when you're waiting for answers. For the Kim family, the calendar became both enemy and friend, each passing day diminishing hope, while simultaneously bringing them one day closer to the truth they couldn't yet see. "People tell you that grief gets easier with time," Mary Kim explained in a 1995 interview. "But when there's no closure, no body to bury, no definitive moment to say goodbye, you're stuck in this terrible limbo. You can't move forward, and you can't go back." The Kim home on Pine Avenue became a shrine of sorts to their missing daughter. Elizabeth's bedroom remained untouched, her accounting textbook still stacked on the desk, her Auburn University pennant still pinned to the wall. Mary dusted it weekly, as if Elizabeth might walk through the door any moment and need a clean place to study. Robert Kim channeled his grief into action. He took early retirement from his job to devote himself full-time to finding his daughter. He became certified as a private investigator, spending countless hours retracing the investigation's steps, developing his own theories, and pursuing leads the police had abandoned. "My husband became a different person," Mary would later recall. "He was consumed by it. Every waking moment was about finding Donna." The strain eventually took its toll on their marriage. By 1997, Robert had moved into an apartment closer to the county courthouse, where he spent days reviewing public records and nights driving the roads of Cleburne County, searching for something everyone else had missed. The couple never divorced, united forever by their shared loss, but the daily weight of their grief proved too heavy to bear together. Michael Kim, Elizabeth's older brother, moved away to California in 1992, unable to walk the streets of Heflin where every corner held memories of his sister. "I couldn't breathe there anymore," he explained years later. "Every time the phone rang, every time there was a knock at the door, that moment of hope followed by crushing disappointment. It was killing me." Only Janet, Elizabeth's younger sister, remained in Cleburne County with her mother. She married in 1994 and had 3 children, the oldest, a daughter, named Elizabeth in honor of the aunt she would never meet. Throughout the 1990s, the Kim family kept Elizabeth's case in the public eye through annual remembrance events. Each May 8th, they organized a community walk that followed the route Elizabeth should have taken that evening, from Pine Avenue to Maple Street, passing through the park where her backpack was found. What began with hundreds of participants gradually dwindled to dozens, but the family never missed a year. Local media covered these anniversaries, though the stories grew shorter with each passing year. By the 10th anniversary in 2000, Elizabeth's case had been featured on 2 national true crime television shows, generating brief flurries of tips that ultimately led nowhere. Meanwhile, Cleburne County itself was changing. The 1990s brought economic challenges as several local factories closed. The population declined as younger residents left for opportunities in Birmingham or Atlanta. First Alabama Bank, where Elizabeth had worked, was acquired by a larger regional bank, the local branch eventually closing altogether. The physical landscape of Elizabeth's case evolved too. The park where her backpack was found was renovated in 1998. The old playground equipment replaced, new lighting installed, improvements that might have prevented a tragedy had they come 8 years earlier. The Kim neighborhood saw older residents pass away, houses change hands, new families move in who knew of Elizabeth only as a local legend. Technology transformed the investigation as well. In 2001, Detective Roy Simmons retired after 27 years with the department. His replacement, Detective Laura Moss, brought fresh eyes and modern techniques to the case. She digitized the case files, created computer models of possible abduction scenarios, and ensured that Elizabeth information was entered into national missing persons databases that hadn't existed in 1990. "Cold cases are never truly cold," Moss told the Anniston Star on the 15th anniversary of Elizabeth's disappearance. "They're just waiting for the right piece of information, the right technology, or the right person to come forward." By the 2000s, DNA analysis had revolutionized forensic science. The cigarette butts and partial fingerprints collected from the park in 1990 were re-examined using techniques that hadn't been available during the original investigation. Though these efforts yielded no immediate breakthroughs, samples were preserved in the hope that future advances might extract more information. Robert Kim didn't live to see those advances. In 2012, after 22 years of searching for his daughter, he suffered a fatal heart attack while sitting in his car outside the Cleburne County Sheriff's Department. He was there to discuss a new tip that had come in, one that would ultimately prove as fruitless as hundreds before it. At his funeral, Sheriff Daniels, himself now retired, placed a case file on top of Robert's casket, a symbol of the quest that had defined his final years. Mary Kim carried on alone, her determination undiminished by time or tragedy. Now in her 70s, she still answered every phone call with a flutter of hope. She maintained a website dedicated to Elizabeth case and embraced social media as a new tool to reach potential witnesses. "Someone knows something" became her mantra, repeated in every interview, printed on t-shirts worn at every anniversary walk. Someone knows something, and someday, they'll tell. By 2019, as the 29th anniversary of Elizabeth's disappearance approached, the case had outlasted 2 sheriffs, 4 lead detectives, and countless promises. But in a small office at the Cleburne County Justice Center, a newly formed cold case unit was about to revisit the county's most notorious unsolved mystery. If you're finding this story as compelling as I do, please take a second to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue bringing these important cold cases to light. What time is it where you're watching? Drop it in the comments below. I'm always fascinated to see how these stories reach people across different time zones, with some of you watching at breakfast while others might be up late at night, unable to sleep after hearing about cases like Elizabeth. In January 2019, Cleburne County Sheriff Marcus Wade stood before the county commissioners with an unusual budget request. After nearly 3 decades on the force, Wade had seen how unsolved cases lingered like open wounds in the community. His proposal: establish Alabama's first rural county dedicated cold case unit. "These aren't just files gathering dust," Wade told the commissioners. "These are promises we made to families that remain unfulfilled." The commissioners approved funding for a 2-person team, modest by urban standards but unprecedented for a county of Cleburne's size. Wade didn't have to look far for who would lead it. Detective Eliza Sawyer, a 15-year veteran of the department with a reputation for methodical thoroughness, had been unofficially working cold cases on her own time for years. "Some detectives are drawn to the adrenaline of active cases," Sheriff Wade explained in a local newspaper profile. "Sawyer's different. She has this ability to immerse herself in the past, to see connections others miss in cases everyone else has given up on." Joining Sawyer was James Martinez, a recent transfer from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. Martinez brought specialized training in forensic genealogy and digital evidence recovery, skills that barely existed when many of Cleburne's cold cases had first been investigated. "I was that kid who read encyclopedia entries for fun," Martinez admitted with a self-deprecating laugh during our interview. "Now I get paid to dive into decades of records looking for the one detail everyone else overlooked." The cold case unit's office occupied a converted storage room at the Justice Center. Within weeks, the walls were covered with timelines and photographs, the shelves stacked with case files dating back to the 1970s. But one case immediately stood out as their top priority. Elizabeth Kim was the obvious first choice, Sawyer explained. Not just because of the high profile or the family's dedication, but because of the evidence preservation. The original investigators did an exceptional job collecting and storing physical evidence, even when they didn't have the technology to fully analyze it. In March 2019, Sawyer and Martinez officially reopened the Kim investigation. Their first step was a complete review of the original case files, over 200 pages of reports, interviews, and leads. They created a digital database of every person mentioned in the investigation, mapping connections that might not have been apparent in the paper files. We approached it with fresh eyes but total respect for the work that came before us, Martinez said. Those original detectives were working with the tools they had. Our advantage isn't that we're better investigators. It's that we have better technology. That technology included forensic advances unimaginable in 1990. The partial footprint found near Elizabeth backpack, preserved in a plaster cast for 29 years, was scanned and digitally enhanced. The cigarette butts collected from the park, once tested only for blood type, now held the potential for DNA analysis. The single hair found on Elizabeth backpack represented both the promise and frustration of cold case investigation. In 1990, hair analysis was limited to visual comparison under a microscope, useful for excluding suspects, but rarely definitive enough for identification. By 2019, DNA extraction from hair had become possible, but success rates remained low for degraded samples. Hair without the root contains mitochondrial DNA, but not nuclear DNA, explained Dr. Vanessa Chen, the forensic scientist who would become instrumental in the Kim case. Mitochondrial DNA can tell us about maternal lineage, but doesn't provide the unique individual profile that nuclear DNA does. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences had attempted to extract usable DNA from the hair in early 2020, but the results were inconclusive, a devastating setback for the cold case unit. Then came an unexpected development that would change everything. In January 2021, the FBI announced a partnership with a private laboratory that had pioneered a revolutionary technique for extracting nuclear DNA from rootless hair shafts. The process, called protein-based hair genotyping, analyzed the protein sequences in hair keratin, which are determined by an individual's DNA. Only 5 labs in the country had this capability, and the FBI was offering access to select cold cases. Detective Sawyer immediately applied to have the Kim case included in the program. The application highlighted the quality of evidence preservation, the community impact, and the 29 years of dedicated pursuit by the victim's family. In March 2021, they received word that Elizabeth's case had been accepted. I called Mary Kim immediately, Sawyer recalled. I was careful not to promise anything. We'd had too many disappointments over the years. But I could hear the hope in her voice. That's what keeps cold case investigators going. That chance to finally deliver answers. The hair sample was carefully packaged and sent to the specialized lab in Virginia. The extraction and analysis process would take approximately 8 weeks, an agonizing wait for investigators who had already waited decades. During this time, Sawyer and Martinez continued building their case, knowing that even a DNA match would need supporting evidence for prosecution. They revisited the timeline of May 8, 1990, creating a minute-by-minute reconstruction of Elizabeth's last known movements. They developed a geographic profile of the area as it existed in 1990, identifying potential abduction sites along Elizabeth's walking route that offered both access and privacy. We were preparing for any outcome, Martinez explained. If the DNA led to someone already on our radar, we needed corroborating evidence. If it led to someone we'd never considered, we needed to understand how they intersected with Elizabeth's life. On June 17, 2021, at 10:42 a.m., Detective Sawyer's phone rang. The caller ID showed the Virginia lab. She put the call on speaker so Martinez could hear, both of them holding their breath as Dr. Liam Richardson, the lab director, delivered the news. "We have a profile," Richardson said, his voice matter-of-fact despite the magnitude of his words. "Full nuclear DNA, 23 markers suitable for CODIS upload and familial matching." After nearly 3 decades, the science had finally caught up with the evidence. The hair had yielded its secrets. Within hours, the DNA profile was uploaded to CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system that contains profiles from convicted offenders across the country. By the end of the day, they had their answer. No direct match in the system. This wasn't the end, but rather the beginning of the next phase. With no direct hit in CODIS, the investigation turned to genetic genealogy, using the DNA profile to identify relatives of the unknown subject through commercial ancestry databases. Think of it as creating a family tree in reverse, explained Carolyn Fitzpatrick, the genetic genealogist assigned to the case. Instead of starting with an ancestor and working forward, we start with the DNA and work backward to identify family connections. The process was painstaking. The DNA profile was compared against voluntary submissions in public databases like GED Match, identifying distant cousins and other relatives. Fitzpatrick then constructed elaborate family trees, looking for intersections and connections that might lead to potential suspects. By August 2021, the genetic genealogy had narrowed the field to a specific family line with roots in eastern Alabama. The next step was obtaining DNA samples from willing family members to further refine the search, a delicate process that required both legal sensitivity and human compassion. We're approaching people who have no idea their family might be connected to a crime, Sawyer noted. We have to balance the need for information with respect for privacy and the understanding that these individuals are not suspects themselves. Through voluntary DNA submissions from distant relatives, the investigation gradually closed in on a specific branch of the family. The breakthrough came when a second cousin, twice removed, agreed to provide a DNA sample that significantly narrowed the field of potential matches. On September 3, 2021, the genetic genealogy team presented detectives Sawyer and Martinez with a name: Edward Allen Klein, 61, a former Cleburne County resident now living outside Montgomery. The name meant nothing to them. Klein had never appeared in any of the original investigation files. He had never been interviewed, never been considered a suspect. He was a ghost who had somehow slipped through the extensive dragnet of the original investigation. Martinez immediately began building a profile. Edward Klein had been 30 years old in 1990, working as a delivery driver for a regional beverage distributor. His route had included stores in Cleburne County, including the Piggly Wiggly, where Elizabeth occasionally shopped. He had no criminal record in 1990, not even a traffic violation. He had moved from Cleburne County in late 1990, just months after Elizabeth's disappearance. On paper, he looked completely unremarkable, Martinez said. That's often the case with predators who evade capture. They blend in, they don't draw attention to themselves. The team needed to confirm the genetic match before making any moves. They obtained a search warrant for discarded DNA, a technique that allows investigators to collect items a suspect has thrown away in public, such as coffee cups or cigarette butts, without alerting them to the investigation. For 2 weeks, they conducted surveillance on Klein, waiting for the perfect opportunity. On September 21st, they retrieved a soda can he had discarded in a public trash can outside a Montgomery gas station. The can was rushed to the state lab for analysis. The call came at 2:17 a.m. on September 23, 2021. The DNA from the soda can matched the hair found on Elizabeth's backpack. The match probability was 1 in 7.2 trillion. After 29 years, they had found their suspect. In the pre-dawn hours, as Sawyer made that emotional call to Mary Kim, a tactical team was already assembling outside Edward Klein's suburban home. The moment they had worked toward for decades was finally at hand. I've worked dozens of cold cases, Sawyer reflected later, but there's something special about Elizabeth's case. Maybe it's how long the family fought for answers. Maybe it's how the community never forgot. Or maybe it's knowing that someone thought they had gotten away with it for all these years, living a normal life while the Kim family suffered every day. Listen, I don't usually do this, but this case really gets to me. If you're finding value in this deep dive into how modern forensics can finally bring justice in decades-old cases, I'd really appreciate if you'd share this video with someone who might be interested. Cold cases like Elizabeth only get solved when people keep talking about them, keep them alive in public memory. Your share might actually help another family find answers. What's the weather like where you are today? Drop it in the comments below. I'm always fascinated by the thought that people are watching this story from sunny beaches, snowy mountains, rainy cities, all connected by our shared interest in seeing justice served, no matter how long it takes. Edward Allen Klein defied every stereotype of a predator. Standing 5'10" with thinning gray hair and reading glasses perpetually perched on his nose, he resembled a high school math teacher more than someone harboring a deadly secret. Neighbors in his Montgomery suburb described him as unremarkable and polite but private, the kind of person who would wave from his driveway but rarely engage in conversation. He kept his yard neat, always paid his HOA fees on time, said Margaret Wilson, who lived across the street from Klein for 15 years. If you'd asked me to pick someone on our block who might be hiding something terrible, he would have been last on my list. Born in 1960 in Gadsden, Alabama, Klein had a childhood that appeared ordinary on paper. School records showed average grades and minimal disciplinary issues. He graduated from high school in 1978, attended community college for 1 semester, then entered the workforce. By 1990, he had settled into a job as a delivery driver for Southern Beverage Distributors, a regional company that supplied drinks to grocery stores and restaurants across eastern Alabama. His route included Cleburne County, where he made weekly deliveries to the Piggly Wiggly, the Heflin Grill, and several convenience stores. This job provided him with legitimate reasons to be in the area and knowledge of local roads and neighborhoods, advantages that would prove crucial in May 1990. What investigators found most disturbing was the calculated nature of Klein's post-crime behavior. Within 3 months of Elizabeth's disappearance, he requested a transfer to a different delivery route, citing a desire to be closer to his aging parents in Montgomery. By December 1990, he had moved away from Cleburne County entirely, severing any visible connections to the area where Elizabeth had vanished. It was a smart move, Detective Martinez observed. Most perpetrators make the mistake of drastically changing their lives after committing a crime, quitting jobs, moving across the country, behaviors that draw attention. Klein made a reasonable, explainable life change that wouldn't raise eyebrows. In Montgomery, Klein built a life designed to avoid scrutiny. He married in 1992, a woman he met through a church singles group. They had no children. He worked for the same beverage company until 2015, earning promotions to route supervisor and eventually operations manager. He joined the Rotary Club, volunteered occasionally at community events, and built a modest retirement account. His only brush with law enforcement was a speeding ticket in 2003. He created the perfect cover, Sawyer explained. A stable marriage, a steady job, community involvement, all the markers of a responsible citizen. Who would look twice at someone like that? The most haunting question remained. What, if any, connection existed between Klein and Elizabeth Kim? Intensive investigation revealed no obvious prior relationship. They hadn't attended the same schools or churches. She wasn't on his delivery route. None of her friends or co-workers recognized his name or photograph. The connection, it seemed, was far more random and disturbing. Security footage from First Alabama Bank preserved in the case files provided the crucial link. On April 24, 1990, 2 weeks before Elizabeth's disappearance, Edward Klein had entered the bank during Elizabeth's shift. Transaction records showed he had cashed a paycheck, and the teller stamp indicated Elizabeth had processed the transaction. The arrest of a suspect in a 29-year-old cold case requires meticulous planning. Once DNA confirmed Edward Klein as their target, Detectives Sawyer and Martinez assembled a specialized team to handle every aspect of the operation. The stakes were enormous. A botched arrest could jeopardize the entire case, potentially allowing a killer to walk free on procedural grounds. "We had one shot to do this right," Sheriff Wade explained. "After 3 decades, we couldn't risk making a mistake that would compromise the prosecution." The arrest team included members from multiple agencies: Cleburne County detectives, Montgomery County tactical officers, and FBI agents who had supported the case. Each brought specific expertise to the operation. The planning sessions covered everything from the approach to the property to the exact wording officers would use during the arrest. District Attorney Caroline Winters worked alongside the team to ensure all legal requirements were met. Search warrants were prepared not just for Klein's residence but also for his vehicles, electronic devices, and a storage unit registered in his name. The warrants were deliberately broad, allowing investigators to search for any evidence related to Elizabeth Kim or other potential victims. When you're dealing with someone who's potentially been hiding a crime for decades, you have to consider they might have kept trophies or other evidence, Winters noted. We needed to be thorough. The team debated the timing and approach. A public arrest at Klein's workplace might minimize risk to officers, but could create unnecessary chaos. A traffic stop presented its own dangers. Ultimately, they decided on a pre-dawn residential arrest, catching the suspect at his most vulnerable while minimizing risk to the community. On September 23, 2021, at 4:30 a.m., the arrest team assembled at a staging area 3 blocks from Klein's home. The neighborhood was quiet, most residents still asleep. Tactical officers took position around the perimeter of the property, while Detective Sawyer and 2 FBI agents approached the front door. At precisely 5:15 a.m., Sawyer knocked firmly on the door, announcing, "Police, search warrant." The team had expected resistance, or at least delay, but to their surprise, lights came on almost immediately. Within moments, Edward Klein opened the door wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, looking confused but not panicked. He seemed more annoyed than afraid, Sawyer recalled, like we were interrupting his sleep for a minor matter that could have waited until morning. That changed when Sawyer stated clearly, "Edward Allen Klein, you're under arrest for the kidnapping and murder of Elizabeth Marie Kim on May 8, 1990. Witnesses described how Klein's expression transformed, the annoyance replaced by shock, then something harder to define. He didn't speak, didn't resist, as officers secured his hands with zip ties. His wife appeared in the hallway behind him, confused and frightened, asking repeatedly what was happening. As Klein was led to a waiting police vehicle, Martinez observed something telling. He never once asked who Elizabeth Kim was, never claimed not to know the name. That's unusual for someone being accused of a crime they didn't commit. Inside the house, the search began immediately. In the garage, investigators found a locked metal cabinet that Klein's wife couldn't open. She didn't have the key, and her husband had never shown her what was inside. When technicians opened it, they discovered a collection of local newspapers from May and June 1990, all featuring stories about Elizabeth's disappearance. By mid-morning, news of the arrest had spread through Cleburne County like wildfire. Local radio stations interrupted regular programming to announce the breakthrough. The Anniston Star rushed to print a special edition. Social media exploded with the news, residents sharing memories of where they had been when Elizabeth disappeared and how the case had affected their community. Mary Kim learned of the arrest in that pre-dawn phone call from Detective Sawyer. After hanging up, she sat alone in her kitchen, the same kitchen where she had waited by the phone for news of her daughter countless times over the decades. "I always knew this day would come," she told reporters who gathered outside her home later that morning. "I just didn't know if I would live to see it." The community's response reflected both shock at the suspect's identity and relief that the case had finally been solved. Longtime residents struggled to reconcile the ordinary delivery driver they vaguely remembered with the monster now revealed. "He was just the beverage guy," said Tom Wilson, who had managed the Piggly Wiggly in 1990. "Came in once a week, restocked the coolers, made small talk about the weather or football. Nothing about him stood out." That ordinariness made the revelation all the more disturbing. Edward Klein hadn't been hiding in shadows. He had been hiding in plain sight, behind a facade of normalcy that no one had thought to question. By afternoon, a spontaneous gathering had formed at the park where Elizabeth's backpack had been found. People brought flowers, candles, and handwritten notes, creating an impromptu memorial. Among them were former classmates of Elizabeth, now in their 50s, some with grown children of their own. "This town has carried Elizabeth's story for 29 years, said Lisa Winters, the friend Elizabeth had been walking to visit on that fateful evening. "Her case changed how parents here raised their kids. It changed how we thought about safety, about trust, and now finally it's changing how we think about justice, that it might be delayed but it does eventually come." As Edward Klein was processed at the Cleburne County Detention Center, booked on charges of kidnapping and murder, the weight of what had been accomplished began to sink in for the investigators. A case that had haunted 3 generations of law enforcement officers had finally been solved. Cold cases are never really about the past, Sawyer reflected. They're about bringing justice into the present, about fulfilling promises that were made long ago. The wheels of justice, having moved imperceptibly for decades, suddenly accelerated. Edward Allen Klein made his first court appearance on September 24, 2021, via video link from the Cleburne County Detention Center. The courtroom was packed with spectators, reporters, community members, and retired law enforcement officers who had worked the case over the years. Judge William Barnett denied bail, citing the severity of the charges and the defendant's potential flight risk. Klein remained expressionless throughout the hearing, speaking only to confirm his name and that he understood the charges against him. District Attorney Caroline Winters announced the state would be pursuing first-degree murder charges, despite the challenges of prosecuting a 29-year-old case. The passage of time does not diminish the gravity of this crime, she told reporters on the courthouse steps, nor does it lessen our commitment to seeking justice for Elizabeth Kim and her family. The legal proceedings moved with deliberate care. The prosecution team, led by Winters, built their case methodically. The DNA evidence formed the cornerstone, but they worked tirelessly to construct supporting evidence around it. They tracked down former co-workers who could place Klein in Cleburne County during the relevant time period. They analyzed his work records, establishing a pattern of deliveries that brought him near the park where Elizabeth's backpack was found. In December 2021, a grand jury returned an indictment on charges of kidnapping and first-degree murder. The trial was scheduled for May 2022, almost exactly 32 years after Elizabeth's disappearance. As the legal process unfolded, Mary Kim experienced a complex mixture of emotions. There's relief, of course, she explained during our interview, but there's also this strange sense of loss. For 29 years, searching for answers gave me purpose. Now that we have them, I'm having to learn how to live differently. The Kim family attended every hearing, Mary always accompanied by her daughter Janet, and often by her son Michael, who returned from California for the proceedings. They sat in the front row, directly in Klein's line of sight, a silent reminder of the lives he had shattered. I wanted him to see us, Mary said. To know that Elizabeth wasn't just a name or a face in a newspaper. She was our daughter, our sister. She was loved, and she is still loved. The trial itself lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented 42 witnesses and over 200 pieces of evidence. The defense, recognizing the strength of the DNA evidence, focused their strategy on challenging the chain of custody for the hair sample and questioning whether it could have been contaminated over the decades. On May 26, 2022, after just 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. 2 weeks later, Judge Barnett sentenced Edward Allen Klein to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Klein was led from the courtroom, Mary Kim stood. In a voice clear and steady, she addressed him directly. I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine. I've carried this burden long enough. The resolution of Elizabeth's case sent ripples through Alabama's criminal justice system. The success of the Cleburne County Cold Case Unit inspired similar initiatives in 5 other rural counties within a year. The Alabama Bureau of Investigation established a dedicated genetic genealogy team to support cold case investigations statewide. The Kim case demonstrated what's possible when you combine preserved evidence with modern technology and dedicated investigators, explained Dr. James Montgomery, director of the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences. It's changing how we approach cold cases across the state. For the community of Cleburne County, the case's resolution brought a measure of healing to a wound that had never fully closed. The annual remembrance walks for Elizabeth transformed from somber vigils into celebrations of persistence and justice. The park where her backpack was found was officially renamed Elizabeth Kim Memorial Park, in a ceremony attended by hundreds. Perhaps the most profound legacy of Elizabeth's case has been its impact on other families waiting for answers. The Kim family established a foundation in Elizabeth's name to support cold case investigations and provide resources to families of missing persons. The foundation's first initiative funded advanced DNA testing for 3 unsolved cases in neighboring counties. Elizabeth's story reminds us that no case is truly unsolvable, Detective Sawyer reflected. Sometimes justice requires patience, sometimes it requires new technology, but it always requires people who refuse to give up. Mary Kim, now in her late 70s, has found a new purpose in supporting other families navigating the limbo of unresolved cases. I tell them what I wish someone had told me 30 years ago, that their loved one matters, that the truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, and that they're not alone in the waiting. In the evidence room of the Cleburne County Sheriff's Department, Elizabeth's case file has been moved from the active cold case section to the solved cases archive. The box contains 32 years of investigative reports, witness statements, photographs, and forensic analyses, a paper trail documenting humanity's determination to find truth and deliver justice, no matter how long it takes. If this story has impacted you, please consider subscribing to my channel. I'm dedicated to bringing attention to cold cases like Elizabeth, showing how modern forensic techniques and dedicated investigators can finally bring answers to families who've waited decades. Your support helps ensure these important stories reach the audiences they deserve. Time may be the greatest ally of those who commit terrible acts, but as Elizabeth's case proves, it can also be their ultimate undoing. No secret stays buried forever. No evidence is truly lost. And no one is beyond the reach of justice. It just might take 29 years to arrive.